Welcome back to Renewed Minds. This edition is brought to you by WMU Grace Fellowship. This women's ministry union meets on the second Tuesday of each month and promotes mission activities and friendships. Ministries include outreach to teachers, first responders, homebound members, young moms, the Christmas store, the Interfaith Food Pantry, and many more. Contact Church on Main at office@churchonmain.church for more details. We'll be discussing challenges and opportunities that we all face, no matter what the season of life we're in. Each episode will offer practical tips we've learned over the years and also share how love and grace can help each of us when we're trying to maintain hope. Today, we have in the studio Tanya Dinkle, owner and coach of Life in Action Coaching, and Bob Smithers, Senior Director of Gift Giving at Virginia Tech. Today, we're talking about charitable giving while staying on a budget. We're going to explore some ideas that help you live a fuller, more meaningful life without breaking the bank. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of charitable giving, a topic that often feels out of reach when money is tight. But there's good news. You don't need a huge budget to make a big difference. Whether it's a few dollars, your time, or just a little creativity, there's ways to give back that align with your financial goals. Stick with us as we share tips and inspiring stories, practical strategies to help you embrace generosity no matter where you are in your financial journey. Let us help show you giving back doesn't have to mean giving up your financial peace of mind.
Absolutely. Giving back can do so many things. So I am so excited today. So first of all, it is just me today. Tommy is not with us today. He had an out-of-town event that he had to head to. So I am very blessed to be able to share the microphone today with Bob Smithers. Bob is the Senior Director of Gift Planning with Virginia Tech, and we are going to spend some time today talking about what charitable giving is and why it is so important and helpful and how it can benefit us and the recipients in so many ways. So I think we've all heard the adage, 'tis better to give than to receive, right?
Amen.
So let's start, Bob, with just kind of talking a little bit about what is charitable giving and how in the world did you get into this type of role where you get to do this every single day of your professional life?
Wow, what a great question. So basically, 26 and a half years ago, I got into what they call development work at a place called Christian Children's Fund in Richmond, Virginia. It is now known as Child Fund International. But I was there basically 6 years, a little over 6 years, and then I made a move to Virginia Tech. And believe it or not, January 3rd, I will will complete my 20th year at Virginia Tech. So I'm a 20-year person at my alma mater, which I am a graduate of Virginia Tech. I got into this, it was basically a total change in my career. I wasn't in development work before that. I was actually in the building supply business or some form of general home construction and roofing materials and things like that. But basically, life changes led me to interview for this job at Christian Children's Fund, and I accepted it. And here I am 26 plus years later. Charitable giving is very important. And needless to say, being in the middle of it at Virginia Tech, which right now we're extremely blessed with a whole lot of charitable giving going on. Mm-hmm. But charitable giving is so important. It has shaped so much of this country because, the United States is one of the most generous countries there is. And just a little bit, I actually did a little research on some charitable giving, exactly, what is it? What is it I'm doing, Mm-hmm. Charitable giving is important because it allows individuals to directly contribute to addressing social issues, providing essential services to those in need, building a stronger community, and fostering a sense of compassion and empathy, while also potentially improving the giver's own well-being, and that's very important, through increased happiness and life satisfaction. Essentially, it enables people to make a positive impact on the world around them by supporting causes that they really care about. There's, the Bible talks of a cheerful giver. And I found that generally speaking, the vast majority of people are very happy with their charitable giving. Everybody thinks everybody does it for a tax deduction. The tax deduction comes in like 7th or 8th on a line of importance of why people do this. It has much more meaning than a tax deduction. Now, certainly there are people that will use it, and fortunately, in this country, the government incentivizes charitable giving, so we have a lot to be thankful for there as well. But people who give receive so much satisfaction. I've seen. We had a donor come in that visited with a scholarship recipient from out of state, from Colorado, and came and sat with her scholarship recipient, and tears just flowed. She was so happy. The young lady came from a situation that without the donor's help, she'd have never been able to attend Virginia Tech. And it was literally a bonding experience. I'm sure that they keep in touch to this day. I also, at Christian Children's Fund, had an experience where a family, the mother had passed away. They wanted to do something in her honor. And so basically we had a need for a well in the Gambia, West Africa. And I was fortunate enough to go to Gambia on a trip with some donors and look at several projects. And we did go to the village where this was. It was a long way. Let's put it this way. It was 60 miles from Banjul, the capital of the Gambia, and it took 3.5 hours to drive there. The roads were that bad. But basically, we got to the village, and I was received as if I were a king because I was, quote, the money guy from the United States. But it wasn't my money. It was this family's money. I took a lot of pictures, and I sent them back to the family. And they called, and the daughter was just shedding tears of happiness. She said, "My mother would have loved this. Thank you for doing it." And on top of that, we changed the lives of those children in that village because, unfortunately, they had a well, but unfortunately it turned bad. And so their YouTube, under 2 years of age, death rate started to climb. And basically the new well, within 6 weeks, the U2 death rate had gone practically to zero.
It's amazing.
We take so for granted turning on a spigot here in this country and having clean, safe water. Where there, it's a matter of life and death.
So you mentioned there are a lot of motivating factors to why people give, and that also means that there are a lot of different ways that people can give. So today's focus is really going to be around the financial charitable giving. We will be talking in a future episode about other ways that you can give back to your community, to organizations that may be in non-monetary ways, which are equally important and equally rewarding, right?
Very much so.
So let's talk about kind of starting with, and this is big for clients of mine that I talk to on the financial side, and when they're talking about budgeting and planning and how in the heck do I carve out money for giving, right?
Okay.
And the key to it is being intentional with the plan to give, right?
Exactly. Well, the first thing, you have to have charitable intent. Old guy Jerry Panis, who was a big fundraising trainer. I actually spent a whole day with Jerry one time, one of the greatest lessons I ever learned in my life. But basically said, first of all, you've got to have people that have charitable intent. They've got to have capacity, meaning they have to have the financial resources to do it. They must love your organization, and they must trust your organization and believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
When you have those components, I look at it this way. I always say, okay, the gift number one is cash, a check, or dollar bills, if you will, although paper is so, now we have Venmo and all this other stuff. But basically an outright gift. And, I hate that in this country we don't have the little passbook savings plans that I had growing up in Central Virginia. And I remember my father taking me to the old F&M, First and Merchants Bank, with my little passbook. And I'll never forget, I gave the lady the passbook. I gave her my penny jar. They ran it through the machine. Came back and I had $3.50 deposited. And then one time I got an extra penny. And I said, "Dad, they gave me an extra penny." And that's where I learned about compound interest from my father.
It's a beautiful thing.
50 plus years ago.
Yeah.
But you have to have the capacity to do that. And, it's tough for young people nowadays because, number one, unfortunately, a lot of them are having to pay for their own retirement. Number two, you've got educations for your children and things like that. So it's tough, but you have to force yourself to save. My father always said, don't forget to pay yourself first.
That's right.
That was the first rule he ever had for me. Pay yourself first. And unfortunately, I never forgot that.
Yeah.
But then you have different ways you can give. For example, I'm working on a gift right now. It's a gift of stock. Mm-hmm. So this person had some Microsoft shares. Mm-hmm. He bought these shares way back in the day, and they were around $40 a share. Microsoft shares today are well over $400. So he has a huge capital gains issue if he were to cash them out, so to speak. You'd have to pay a giant tax on that relinquishment. But you can give that stock to charity, and it all goes to charity. You get the fair market value as a charitable deduction. So if you have, if you're fortunate enough to be in that shape, and there are a lot of people this year that are in really good shape. We're seeing more stock gifts this year than we've seen in a long time. But there are other ways to do it. There's things, if you get into complicated giving, you have such things as charitable gift annuities. You have things as charitable trust. I won't get too deep into those. Sure. We call them life income gifts. You make a gift to a charity, and they in turn make a payment back to you for your lifetime, or maybe a term of years. And then upon the either the death of the beneficiary or the termination of the time, then the charitable remainder goes to the charity. Okay. Your smaller charitable organizations probably can't do that, but a lot of the bigger ones can.
Yeah.
So, but the key is you've got to sit down and you've got to think strategically about your giving. And I tell people too, I say, don't forget you will get a tax deduction.
Yeah. So for people to understand kind of the practicality of how this all plays out. So I think all of us can clearly see in our mind's eye, I give you cash, charitable organization, and you take that and you do something with it. It's a little more abstract when you start talking about, I'm going to gift you stock at a certain value. So how does that transact so that the charitable organization actually gets financial benefit and reward to be able to actually do things to develop and run their programs?
Okay, great question. So what generally happens is, and in our case, and in most cases, when a charitable organization receives the shares, they will immediately liquidate them to cash.
Okay, so they sell them out.
They settle it, get this settlement amount, and then they use the cash within their organizations. Okay. It is very rare, extremely rare for them to hold on to a stock.
And because they are a nonprofit organization that qualifies you for that tax deduction as the giver, they are not realizing that tax implication that you would have realized. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
A true charity is a 501c3 organization, and it is not taxable. They pay no taxes on that gift. So, for example, with the Microsoft, in this case, $40 versus $400, he'd have almost a $360 taxable gain that he'd have to pay capital gains on if he withdrew it himself. He'd pay a whole lot of money, probably a third of it to capital gains tax. And again, big numbers, round numbers here. Yeah. But in this case, we get to use the whole gift.
Sure. Okay. So you've got to determine what you're going to give, or, and even how much that you're going to give, right? And in order to figure this out, you can work with financial planner, you can work with your tax advisor, you could also work with like someone in your role who is actually at the organization in charge of these types of activities. I know I've heard you over the years talk about the different, like you're sharing stories today, where you worked with people and helping them figure out how to take advantage of the resources that they have in the giving capacity. But then you have to decide where you're going to give it.
Right.
And depending on how much you have to give, you might actually have multiple places that you could divide things up.
Very much so. The number one charitable gift goes to a religious organization in this country. Second generally is an alma mater.
Oh, okay.
So relatively speaking. So those are the top. But then, you have all kinds of charities, the SPCA, the American Heart Association, the Red Cross, whatever it might be. And those are large organizations. They can help you with complex things. You can give real estate, it's things like that, and I've worked on several real estate gifts. I actually had a family now that have done 4 charitable trusts
Wow.
That basically started because their financial planner told them they inherited some land they didn't want, they didn't need. They were financially in a very good position, and they decided to donate it to us, and we took it and immediately liquidated it, put it in a trust. And so it's called a flip crut. We sold the property, and then the trust is making lifetime payments to the donors that gave us that gift. So they didn't want to have to just fool with real estate. They were getting a little elderly, and they were looking to retire, and they've moved into a complex, and a retirement complex and all that, and they just didn't want to fool with the real estate.
Yeah.
And then they ended up inheriting another tract of land, and we did it twice.
Did it all over again.
And then we did two others that were different. Well, actually, the third one was land as well, and then a third one was a securities gift. So in that way, they basically have, from the trust they have with us, their payments, basically take care of their financial needs with the retirement center they're living in.
Okay.
So, and then, of course, they have other income as well.
Sure.
So, but that was a good use, and it was, I commend the financial planner that offered that, because there wasn't really anything he could do with it. And he said, hey, you need to call your alma mater and talk to them, because they might be able to help you with this. So solve problems for everybody.
I think that really speaks to, as well, working with someone who is really good and really up to date on what the current regulations are, because we all know our government likes to change the rules and change the loopholes and all of the things that we have to work through to get deductions and other things, right?
Very much so.
So making sure that the people that you're working with from a tax, from a financial planning perspective, from a giving perspective, are up to date on what you can legally do, how that's actually going to play through for you all the way through the end of the gift giving.
Very much so. And also, if you're 70 and a half or older, there is the greatest gift there is out there if you have an IRA. So if you have an IRA, you can give up to $100,000 of that IRA per year to charitable organizations. It would satisfy your required minimum distribution requirement, and you pay no tax on that distribution. If you take that distribution, it is taxable at ordinary tax rates. If you give it to charity, the charity gets the full market value of that to use in their charitable purpose.
Wow.
So that is great, because you do not have to itemize taxes to do it. It is tax forgiveness, not a tax deduction. Because we run into issues. I'll never forget, years ago, I had a gentleman call that said, if you can get me a tax deduction, I'm willing to give you guys up to $1 million.
Wow.
The problem was he had maximized his deductions. He wasn't allowed any more deductions. And so you have to be sure that, number one, if you give a charitable gift, you have to itemize to take it. But number two, you need to make sure that you're not falling into a lot of, let's just say, positions that can put you in a taxable situation you may not know about. So that's why we always tell people, before you make this move, you need to talk with your tax advisor to be sure that this is a move that you can, if you're trying to maximize tax issues, you need to be sure it's allowable and deductible.
Yeah. That's some really good news, though. I'm thinking about listeners who may be hitting that late 60, early 70 age bracket, and they're still working because they choose to.
Correct.
And maybe in a situation where they've got a really good, healthy income, this is a good way for them to help some of that tax burden.
It very well is, and it's a great way for them to, number one, lower their RMD, because you're removing the funds from your IRA. And number two, it's just a good way to get rid of it without any tax consequences.
Can you define for us RMD for those who may not know?
So if you have an IRA and you have to take the RMD at 72 years of age. And so RMD is required minimum distribution. And if you have an IRA, say at Fidelity or wherever it is, they have a calculator. You can go and figure it out, what your RMD would be based on the dollar amount that's in the account. But you can do an IRA QCD, which is a qualified charitable distribution, at 70 and a half. So you don't have to wait to do the QCD portion. You can do that at 70 and a half. And, a lot of people have been very blessed, and especially people that may have had a defined benefit retirement program, and also IRA accounts, and they're finding themselves that they've been very blessed over the years, and those IRAs have grown, and they're wondering how they're going to get rid of it. So that can help with that issue.
It's fantastic. So another thing that people, I think, should be considering as they're thinking about charitable giving is involving others. And this, to me, is where the real fun can be, because this is where you can start to change family behaviors and habits and appreciation for things, getting, kids involved, even getting community groups. If you wanted, if you're involved in a church and you've got a life group that you want to get involved in a charitable giving campaign, or, just any of the work groups, leave the work politics stuff, off to the side, but involving others, it can impact the gift giving because it could be a larger amount because you're coming from a bigger pool of people, but you can also impact the people that are in that group too, like we were talking about before.
The paradigms in this country have changed since I was a little kid, and I find it fascinating that so many kids nowadays, when I was growing up, virtually 70% of everybody went to church or somewhere, or synagogue or somewhere on Sunday or Saturday or whatever it might have been. And you learned about tithing and participation. And those numbers have plummeted somewhat. And so people don't, I'm kind of shocked at the people that don't understand charitable giving. I can still remember my father on Saturday night sitting down and going through what he did that week to put in the envelope to take to church on Sunday morning. The good news is there are lots of ways that you can educate your family with that. And I'll deal with family first. And one of the best ways is to create a donor advised fund. A donor advised fund basically is a platform that let's say you have an account at Fidelity. You can put any amount of money now. It used to be minimums, but I don't think there's any minimums anymore, at least at Fidelity. That money is basically, you're giving it to a 501c3 when you give it to Fidelity. And basically Fidelity has it in a trust that is a 501c3. So you get the deduction immediately. But you don't have to direct it to charity until you're ready to do that. So basically the money's sitting there. Let's say somebody puts $5,000 in a donor advised fund. And they could go in on Christmas morning and tell the family, hey, family, I have some money in a donor advised fund, and I want us to sit down and let's talk about what we'd like to do with this money. And you could send $1,000 to the SPCA and $1,000 to the food bank and $1,000 to your church and $1,000 to your alma mater, whatever it might be. As long as they're a 501c3, they can receive, quote, a grant, unquote, from your donor advised fund. But you can involve whoever you want to in making those selections.
That's awesome.
So donor advised funds are a great way because you get the deduction when you put the money in the donor advised fund. It may be 2 years before you give them to a direct charity. But this way you get the tax advantage in the year you make the gift to the donor advised fund.
So that's one vehicle that you could use. So if you're thinking kind of bigger picture, you're budgeting right throughout the year. You've worked with your accountant or your tax advisor and your financial planner. These are all really important roles that people should be not discounting the use of at all. These are important conversations. But you're having these conversations and you're planning every month as you're doing your monthly budget that you are setting aside certain money. The donor advised fund is a vehicle that you could use. Go ahead and just stick money in there, throughout the year. And then I love your Christmas example. That's great. What a great time to let's pull everybody together and have a good bonding family giving experience. That's fantastic.
Everybody's at grandma's or grandpa's or wherever it might be, and they use that as a family experience. And we've had people that have done donor advised funds strictly for that purpose, to educate their children and grandchildren.
I love that.
So, it can be a great tool to teach people about number one, stewardship, but number two, about charitable giving and having a great impact on others.
Yeah. Something else that ties into that, which I think is kind of I would call it the last step probably of this process. That is going back and reflecting on what you've done. Again, could be another good family activity if you want to pull that in.
Yes.
But look at where you've given, how that money has been used, if you can get access to that. That's just another kind of, I guess, a reinforcing behavior to help you continue to give.
Sure it is. You take a look at where your giving went to and things like that. I know here we've always supported Micah's Backpacks. Good friend Casey Jones, who passed away way too young. He was a teacher here in the Blacksburg system, and I'll never forget Casey. He always pushed Micah's Backpacks. I said, Casey, why do you push that? And I'll never forget what he said. It has stuck with me since he's been gone. He said, because a parent will never use that food to solve their addiction problem. And he saw, needless to say, when you're in the public, dealing with the general public, you're dealing with a whole wide spectrum of people. And he said, this is Montgomery County. People think we have a lot of money. He said, there's a lot of poor kids here.
Right.
And he always said that, I support them because what they do has a significant impact on the kids that come into my gymnasium.
Yeah.
And so we've supported that to this day, strictly because of what Casey thought and how I would have never thought of that in a gazillion years.
Yeah.
Just never. And it changed our total way of thinking. And, so, okay, this is a bucket. This is definitely a continuing bucket of our giving. It's something that we're always going to do.
I'm glad you mentioned that because my husband and I have conversations every now and then because, you go to every store, and this is not just a Christmas thing, right? This is all year long. Would you give to fill in the blank fund, right? Round up, or do you want to donate $1, $3, $5, whatever the case may be? And we do a lot of charitable giving throughout the year to different places that mean something to us. And that changes sometimes based on what season where we are, right?
Sure.
But it's okay to sit down and identify, as we talked about earlier, where you want to give your money, which means there are some you're going to have to say no to, and that's okay.
I'm with you there, because charitable giving is personal.
It is.
I firmly believe that, and if people want to do it, that is absolutely fine. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But to me, I want to sit down and I want to know about the organization. I want to know, okay, maybe I'll go to Charity Navigator and take a look at their $9.90.
Right.
Is a high percentage being used for the purpose it's so-called working for?
Right.
Or do they have a 60% overhead budget?
Right.
So I'm leery of those organizations, having worked at especially at CCF, because we were being compared with other organizations, and fortunately, all of them were pretty good. Save the Children and places like that, World Vision and things. So who do real good jobs with that. But it's kind of like voting. It's personal. I'm not going to vote for is personal. Who I'm going to give my extra dollars to is a personal decision.
Right.
And I have some reluctance on that, but I'm not saying don't do it or things like that, or I won't go shop where somebody does that, or I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
But I just think that giving is truly, to me, a very personal and a very, you give to things, generally speaking, that you know a little bit about, and you've seen them have an effect on your community or the world or whatever it might be. Yeah. And so I just think that is that's more of a personal decision. Yeah. That's just me.
No, I agree with you completely. I will jump in and give just a little tip, because I know this is an area where people struggle. They struggle to say no because it feels like you don't care about the cause, right? And that's generally not the case. In most cases, and I know personally that's never the case for me. It's not that I don't care. It's that I choose to take the money that I have, that I've dedicated for giving, and pull it together to be a bigger donation that I can then direct to, as you said, a cause that I have researched, that I am passionate about. I see the work that's being done and all of those other things. I treat those conversations, especially when I'm in the store, very much like I treat the credit card offer conversations. So they ask the same thing too, right?
Yes.
Would you like to save an extra? And they throw out this nice little dollar amount that says, if you open an account today, no, thank you. Are you sure? No, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, a smile and a no, thank you. And you just keep moving on with your day. You don't need to feel badly and carry that with you. Saying no is an absolutely appropriate answer. And then just direct the money that you have available, that you've budgeted, to an area that you're passionate about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some common mistakes that people make. What are some things that you've seen people do when you think about charitable giving that you're like, oh, wow, if I could just warn people, these are some pitfalls. What would you tell them?
Well, the number one pitfall we run into right now is people wait too late. There are certain gifts right now that, we've got 8 business days left in this year.
That's just crazy, by the way.
Yeah, can you believe
that's as of this
Christmas
recording, we have 8 business days.
And people, so I always tell people, have your charitable giving done by December 1st.
Okay.
I tell everybody that. And, I say, number one, if you're doing something a little more technical, like a gift of stock or things like that, you want to be sure it gets done. And you want to have time to recover if it doesn't. Mm-hmm. If you wait till December 15th to do those, there may not be time to recover from it. And, we've had one example that comes to mind real quick is where a gentleman thought he had given a gift of stock to a charitable organization only to find out that the charitable organization didn't receive it until January.
Oh.
A stock gift, the date is received by the charity. That's the date it gets credit.
Yep.
And in this particular case, the gentleman called and said, I understand that you guys didn't pull my stock gift. Well, so everybody knows, a charity has no control over a stock gift whatsoever. It is controlled by the donor and his or her broker. They have to send the stock. I tell people it's like a pitcher and a catcher in a baseball game. A stock is thrown by the pitcher, the donor, and the catcher only gets it when it hits the mitt. Mm-hmm. The catcher can't control the ball, can't speed it up, can't slow it down, can't make it a curveball, can't make it a slider. Mm-hmm. It is a thrown ball by the donor, and only when it hits the charitable recipient's account do you get credit for it. So you need to be sure, that if you do something like that, you want to double and triple confirm with your brokerage house before the end of the year that the gift has been received, and call the charity and see if they've gotten it.
Yeah, so a couple of quick things. One, we're doing this in December, so it's a little bit late for 2024 giving, right?
Right.
But thinking ahead, we've talked about consulting with your tax advisor, consulting with your financial planner. These are great things for you to go ahead and start planning, getting on the calendar in January, February. Go ahead and get those conversations started. Figure out what you need to be doing through the entire year. Build that into your monthly spending plan so that next November you're moving these things through, right?
Exactly.
And then the other thing is, around the control of it. I know anytime that Brian and I are moving money for whatever reason, whether it's a charitable giving or we're just changing some investments, I'm usually the one on the phone. Brian does, I guess, as many, but we are saying, hey, this is what we want to do. When? Give me a date. When are you going to execute that?
Right.
And then there's also a follow-up on our end just to make sure that it went through when we thought it was going to go through.
Yes.
And it sounds like this is the same. It would be a good practice.
Yes.
You just don't make an assumption that just because you called and said, hey, go do, especially around the holidays because offices get closed, people take vacations, all the things.
Yes, you run into a lot of things. Number one, brokerage houses are extremely busy because everybody's trying to get their gifts in and other things for the end of the year and for tax purposes. Number two, this time of year you can run into what I call the B team issue. Your A team is on vacation, your B team is there, and they get behind because they're not the A team for a reason. Yeah. So you have to just be careful of that, and you need you need to be sure to stewardship that gift to be absolutely sure.
And you can give these gifts anytime. November, December is not a magic time to do charitable giving. You can give this anytime throughout the year check that box that you've given what you can give based
Right.
on what you have budgeted to do, and then you don't have to worry about the time frame or the B team.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another thing I would tell people is if you have an IRA QCD and you have reached the mandatory distribution age of 72, a lot of people say, okay, well, I'm going to take that distribution in December. They're going to wait. I ran into several years ago, once the law was finalized and it was written in law and it was in stone, it wasn't being renewed every year with sunset provisions. The smarter financial people were telling their clients, look, take your RMD early in the year. 2 reasons. Number one, you don't have to worry about it. Number two, should you pass away in that year without having taken your RMD, that creates an extra taxable issue for your final federal taxes. So now we get a whole lot of RMD gifts January, February, March, because financial advisors, and I say the really, really sharp ones, are telling their clients, take care of this now.
Yeah.
Don't wait, because if something should happen, it's not the end of the world, don't get me wrong, but it is an additional headache for your executive.
Absolutely.
And whoever's handling your final tax return.
That's good stuff.
So-
Okay. Any other tips?
I think that's about it. Just also don't forget what old Dad said. Be sure to pay yourself first.
That's right. That's right. There's a reason it's at the top of the budget list.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. Exactly
All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much. This has been so great. I've learned a lot. I've heard Steve off to the side, kind of
shaking my head going, yeah, you're hitting all the buttons for me.
So hopefully you guys have learned something. And that's all we have for today. We thank you so much for investing your time in our messages, and we are so grateful for each of you. If you found today's episode to be helpful, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share it with other people who you think could benefit. If you'd like to join in the conversation, if you would like to connect with Tommy or me, if you have questions that are more in Bob's realm, send an email to us and we will get those to the right folks. And who knows, might even develop a whole nother episode on a topic. So we would love to hear from you. Our email is renewedminds@churchonmain.church. We hope that you make it a great day and approach every day with a renewed mind.
Hopefully this brings a renewed perspective to the challenges and opportunities you're facing today. What steps are you going to be taking to show love and grace to everyone? If you have any questions or comments about our podcast, please send an email to renewedminds@churchonmain.church. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. Listen next week for the next Renewed Minds.